The bronze sphere was humming, a low vibration in the obsidian floor that made Vex Thal's mandibles ache. He cracked his knuckles, the habit before every tactical assessment across 47 campaigns, and stood at the viewing blister's edge, staring down at a pale blue world the locals called Earth. 1,247 warships hung in the void behind him, the largest expeditionary force assembled since the last Great War, and the humans had not replied. Not to the hails, not to the warnings, not to the diplomatic packets that Ambassador Tren Sol had spent 3 centuries refining, his bronze sphere humming the whole time, filed under cultural anomaly, non-urgent. Thal turned from the blister. The bridge smelled of ozone and the sweet chemical tang of respiratory paste. Amber panels glowed at stations unlit for ages, warmed now for this. Admiral Ira Sen stood at the center, her 12-world cloak rippling in the recycled air, her 6 segmented eyes fixed on the tactical display. She was old, even by the long measure of her kind, and had never lost a campaign. Category 4, she said, not looking at him. Planetary defense only, non-expeditionary, non-interstellar. Thal said nothing. The words were from the Concord Registry, filed when humanity had been admitted with polite handshakes and a trade agreement for tin and honey. No fleet above cruiser class. No warp signatures beyond the home system in 2 centuries. The administrative classification that made this annexation possible. Commander, Sen's voice was gravel sliding over glass. Your assessment. He cracked his knuckles again. The scar across his left mandible itched, a shell fragment from the realloy border 3 years ago. He had almost died there. He had never learned who manufactured the shell. The silence is strange, he said, not yet frightening. Sen's mandibles clicked once, amusement or dismissal. She turned to the tactical display, where ship icons hung in perfect formation above Earth. They will comply. They have no choice. The annexation is approved. Thal watched the pale blue world turn slowly beneath them. No lights flickered on the dark side. No ships rose to meet them. Just the sphere, humming through the floor, a sound ignored since the first filing. Days earlier, the fleet had dropped from warp in the outer system. The flare of so many drives had lit the void like a new star. Thal had stood at this same blister, watching the light fade, the human world growing larger. He had expected something. A transmission, a plea, a threat. The humans had done nothing. For 3 days the fleet had drifted in formation and the humans had not replied. Lieutenant Kess Vorn had been the one to say it first. She was young, her compound eyes the dried honey color of the Vel Shareth witness cast. She worked the sensor pit, and she had looked up from her station with her mandibles half-parted, the way her people did when they smelled something wrong. Commander, she had said, the silence has a shape. He had not understood her then. He understood her now, standing at the blister, the sphere humming through his boots, the earth turning beneath him like a face that would not look up. Sen touched the display. The tactical overlay shifted, showing the fleet's deployment, heavy cruisers in the outer shell, plasma lance arrays charged, missile tubes warm. The mandate alone carried enough firepower to glass a continent. Fighter wings cycled through readiness checks. The machinery of conquest, polished and patient, waiting for a target that would not present itself. Send the final warning, Sen said. Standard format. They have until the next watch rotation to acknowledge Dominion authority. Thal nodded. He did not believe the humans would answer. He did not know why he believed this, only that the humming in the floor had settled into his bones, and the scar on his mandible itched with a persistence that felt like memory trying to surface. The warning went out. A full watch rotation passed. The humans did not reply. Then the transmission came. It was 14 words, spoken by a human voice, calm and unhurried, as if reading a weather report. The translation matrix rendered it in clear galactic standard, and when it played across the bridge, the amber panels seemed to dim. The iron wake has been notified. Please maintain your current position. Thank you. Sen laughed. It was a single sound, sharp and dry, her mandibles clicking in the rhythm of amusement. The iron wake, what is that, a fishing vessel? No one else laughed. Thal watched the tactical display where the earth still turned, still dark, still silent. The 14 words hung in the air like smoke. He counted them. He had counted them 3 times. Please maintain your current position. Not a plea, not a threat. A request, polite and final, as if the humans were the hosts and the fleet were the guests. Analysis, Sen said, her voice still light. Vorn worked her station. Her 3-fingered hands moved across the sensor interface, and her compound eyes reflected the amber light. No more transmissions. No signal origin triangulated. The voice came from the surface, but the routing is unusual. Unusual how? It didn't bounce, Vorn said. No relay, no satellite handoff. It came from the surface, as if the atmosphere wasn't there. Thal felt the humming in his boots change pitch. He looked down at the floor, at the obsidian alloy that carried the vibration from 3 corridors away. The bronze sphere, Tren Sol's sphere. It had been humming since the first filing, and now it was humming louder. Sen touched her ceremonial prosthetic, the left forelimb missing at the second joint, replaced with polished silver. She did this when she was thinking. The annexation is approved. The fleet is committed. There is no diplomatic off-ramp. She said this to the display, not to them. Thal understood. She was reminding herself, not her officers. The machinery of conquest required a target, and the target was not cooperating. Continue standard protocols, Sen said. If they will not speak, we will speak with plasma lances. Thal said nothing. He watched the earth, and he thought of the realloy border, and the shell fragment that had nearly killed him, and the way the silence had a shape that he could almost see if he looked at it from the corner of his eye. The fleet held position. Another rotation passed. The sphere hummed louder. Then Vorn found it. She was running a routine calibration sweep, something she did every shift to keep the sensor arrays aligned. The pulsar in the outer system threw radiation in patterns that distorted returns, and she had learned to filter the noise. She knew the shape of noise the way a musician knows the shape of silence. This was not noise. Commander, she said, and her voice was different, smaller. I have a return. Thal crossed the bridge in 6 strides. He did not run. Running was for emergencies, and this was not yet an emergency. But he moved fast, and the scar on his mandible pulled with each step, a tightness that felt like warning. Vorn's display showed a faint blip, distorted by the pulsar's radiation, wrong in every way. Mass without thermal signature, velocity without drive bloom, a shape that moved against the current of the void as if the current were not there. Distance. Unclear, the pulsar interference. Best estimate. She hesitated. Her compound eyes tracked the blip, and her 3-fingered hands hovered over the interface as if she were afraid to touch it. It's not a ship. I mean, it is, but the profile doesn't match anything in the registry. Thal leaned over her station. The blip was faint, barely more than a ghost in the noise, but it was moving. Toward them, or toward Earth, or toward something in between. The trajectory was ambiguous, the speed impossible to calculate with the interference. Course change. None yet, it's just drifting, but fast, very fast. Sen had not moved from the center of the bridge. She watched them from her station, her 6 eyes darkening, the color shift that meant anger, or the color shift that meant she was about to make a decision. With Sen, the two were often the same. A comet, she said, a dead station, a sensor ghost. Yes, Admiral, Vorn said, but her hands did not leave the interface, and her eyes did not leave the blip. Thal straightened. The humming in the floor had reached his teeth now, a vibration that made him want to clench his jaw. He thought of Tren Sol, the old ambassador, filing reports that no one read, carrying his bronze sphere through council chambers where the hum was dismissed as a cultural quirk. The Vel-Shareth were watchers, record-keepers, truth-carriers across civilizations. They were also few in number, politically powerless, dismissed as relics. Thal had met Saul once, at a reception on the council station. The old Vel-Shareth had pressed the sphere into his hands, a formal greeting, nothing more, and Thal had felt the vibration then, faint but persistent, like a heartbeat in metal. He had handed it back, polite and puzzled, and Saul had looked at him with those dried honey eyes and said nothing. Now the sphere hummed louder, and the blip on Vorn's screen drifted closer, and the 14 words hung in the recycled air of the bridge. Please maintain your current position. Continue tracking, Thal said. Full sensor focus. I want to know what that is before it knows what we are. Vorn nodded. Her hands moved across the interface, and the sensor arrays shifted, reaching into the void with electromagnetic fingers, trying to touch the thing that moved without light. Sen turned back to her tactical display. Category 4, she said again, but quieter now. Planetary defense only. Thal did not answer. He stood at the viewing blister, the earth turning beneath him, the fleet at his back, and he listened to the sphere hum through the floor, a sound that had been waiting since the first filing to be heard. The blip moved closer. The silence held, and somewhere in the dark between the fleet and the pulsar's shadow, something that had no name was coming to keep a promise written in metal and time. The sensor return sharpened over the next hour. Vorn did not leave her station. Her three-fingered hands moved in patterns Thal had never seen, pulling filters, forcing the blip into a shape the registry would recognize. It refused. The mass reading flickered between estimates, too large for a fighter, too small for a cruiser, moving at velocities that made the trajectory line bend in ways that hurt to follow. Still no thermal, she said. Her voice had flattened the way voices did when the mind was too busy to inflect. No drive bloom, no warp signature, it's just there. Thal stood behind her, close enough to smell the mineral bite of the ion-filtered light on her station. The scar across his mandible itched. He did not touch it. Touching the scar meant he was afraid, and he did not want to know yet if he was afraid. Distance, he asked again. Closer, much closer. Sen's voice cut across the bridge. Show me. She had not moved from the center, but her 6 eyes had shifted, 3 of them tracking Vorn's display. The color in them was wrong, not the darkening of anger, but something Thal had never seen. It took him a moment to name it. Uncertainty. Vorn pulled the image onto the main display. The blip resolved into a smear of distorted pixels, barely more than a ghost, but a ghost with edges. Hard edges. The kind that belonged to something built, not formed. Optical, Sen asked. Pulsar interference is too heavy. The radiation. Optical, Sen said, and this time it was not a request. Vorn routed the forward arrays through the interference filters, stacking frames, building an image from noise. The display flickered. The ghost sharpened, and then for 3 seconds they saw it. A shape, black against the black. No lights, no markings, just a silhouette that absorbed the starlight around it, a hole in the void with the outline of something that had traveled very far and burned along the way. The bridge went quiet, the kind of quiet that had weight. Sen stared at the image, her mandibles parted then closed. She touched her ceremonial prosthetic, the silver catching the amber light. A comet, she said, but the word had no force. A dead station. No one answered. The image had burned into every eye. Thal felt the humming in the floor reach his chest, a vibration that seemed to come from inside him rather than through the alloy. The sphere. Tren Saul's sphere. It was not just humming now, it was singing. He turned from the display. 3 corridors away, through the obsidian walls, something that had been waiting for 3 centuries was finally being answered. Admiral, he said, I recommend we hold position. Sen's eyes found him. all 6 of them tracking together the way predators tracked prey that had moved unexpectedly. Hold position. We are the Dominion fleet. We do not hold position for ghosts. We hold position for threats we do not yet understand. The words came out before he could stop them. He had not spoken to Sen this way in 9 years of service. Not since the Realloy border, since the shell fragment had torn his mandible and he had lain in the dark, listening to the medics argue about whether he would live. Sen's mandibles clicked once, sharp and dry but not amusement. Commander Thal, are you suggesting we retreat from a Category 4 species? I am suggesting we learn what that is before we commit 1,247 ships to finding out. He had used the number, the title number. He saw Sen register it. He saw her understand that he was counting, that he had been counting since the silence began. She turned back to the display. The optical image had faded, swallowed by the pulsar's radiation, but the sensor return remained. Closer now. Close enough that Vorn's hands had stopped moving, her compound eyes fixed on the trajectory line that bent toward the fleet like a finger pointing. Full battle readiness, Sen said. All ships, raise shields, charge plasma lances. The bridge erupted into motion. Stations came alive. The amber panels brightened. The air changed, the ozone thickening, the sweet tang of respiratory paste mixing with something sharper. Fear, Thal thought, or maybe that was just him. He stood at the viewing blister, watching the dark between the stars where the shape had been. The fleet around him was a machine of terrible beauty, 1,247 ships preparing to burn the sky. And somewhere in the dark, something was coming that had no need of preparation. The sphere hummed louder. Vorn broke the quiet. Commander, the return has shifted course. Thal crossed to her station in 4 strides, toward us. Toward Earth, but passing close, very close. How close? She did not answer. The tactical display showed the trajectory line, and the line passed through the center of the fleet formation. Not near, through. Sen saw it too. All ships defensive dispersal now. The order went out. Across 1,247 vessels, drives flared, ships shifting from perfect formation into a defensive shell. The void lit with plasma vents and maneuvering thrust. The mandate shuddered as its own drives engaged, pushing the flagship laterally. The blip did not change course. It passed through the space where the fleet had been. Silent, dark, moving at a speed that should have torn it apart, should have left a wake of radiation. It left nothing. No wake, no trail, just the shape of something that moved through the void the way a blade moved through water. And then it stopped. Not slowed, not decelerated, stopped. From its cruising velocity to 0 in the space of a breath. No drive flare, no structural stress. No physics Thal understood. The fleet hung scattered in the void. 1,247 ships with weapons hot and shields raised, pointing at a shape that had simply ceased to move. Vorn's hands were frozen on her interface. Commander, she whispered, it's not drifting, it's holding. Holding what? Position relative to Earth, relative to us, it's waiting. Thal felt the scar on his mandible burn. Not itch, burn. The Realloy border. The war that was supposed to last a season and ended up lasting 3 years. The shells that fell from empty sky, from ships no sensor detected, from an enemy that never showed itself. He had never learned who manufactured the shell. He knew now. The realization settled like a stone in mud. The scar was human-made. The war had been human-fought. The Dominion had been fighting humans for 3 years without knowing it, and humans had been letting them think they had won. No, not letting them think they had won, letting them think they had been fighting at all. Thal turned from the sensor station. He walked to the viewing blister, each step deliberate, carrying him further from the bridge's chaos and closer to something he did not yet have words for. The Earth turned beneath him. The shape hung in the void behind him, and the sphere hummed through the floor, a vibration that had been waiting for 3 centuries to find the right ear. Sen's voice cut through the silence behind him. "Commander, return to your station." He did not turn. "Admiral, the realloy border 3 years ago, the shells that fell from empty sky. Did we ever identify the manufacturer?" The bridge went quiet, a different quiet, the quiet of a question that should not have been asked. Sen did not answer. Her 6 eyes tracked him, and in them Thal saw the same settling he had felt in his own chest. She knew. She had always known. The Dominion's intelligence had filed it under unknown, probable smuggler activity, and the war had ended, and no one had asked again. No one except the Vel Sharath. No one except Tren Saul, carrying his bronze sphere through council chambers where the hum was dismissed as a quirk, filed under cultural anomaly, non-urgent. Thal turned from the blister. He looked at Sen, and he looked at Vorn, and he looked at the bridge crew, each of them holding their stations as if the stations were the only solid things left. "The ship did not need to fire," Thal said. The words came out quiet, but they carried. It had already won before the fleet arrived. Sen's mandibles clicked. Once, twice, a third time, and the rhythm was wrong, not amusement, not anger, something that had no name in the Dominion's language of command. "What are you saying, Commander?" Thal did not answer. He turned back to the blister, to the earth, to the shape in the void that had stopped moving and was now, very slowly, beginning to turn. It was turning toward them. The optical feed reached the bridge before the sensor alarms. One moment the shape was a silhouette against the stars. The next, it was facing the fleet, and in the burned hull, details began to resolve. Not weapons, not hatches, not the architecture of war that the Dominion understood, something else, something that looked like growth, like time made visible, like patience written in metal and left to wait. Vorn's voice came from behind him, small and strange. "Commander, the optical arrays are picking up markings." "What kind of markings?" "Not markings, words carved into the hull." She put them on the main display. The bridge stared. The fleet stared. 1,247 ships, their crews pressing against their own viewports, reading words that had been carved into burned metal before their empire was born. The words were simple. 4 of them, written in a language the translation matrix recognized instantly, as if it had been waiting for this moment too. "We are still here." The silence that followed was the loudest sound Thal had ever heard. It filled the bridge. It filled the fleet. It filled the void between the Dominion and the shape that had traveled across centuries to write 4 words in metal and wait for someone to read them. Thal felt the humming in the floor stop. Not fade, not quiet, stop. The bronze sphere 3 corridors away fell silent for the first time in 3 centuries. The waiting was over. The promise had been kept. And somewhere in the dark, something else was moving. The thing that moved was not a ship. Thal saw it first on Vorn's secondary display, a flicker at the edge of the sensor range, coming from the direction opposite the burned hull. Smaller, faster. No attempt at stealth, just raw velocity, closing on the fleet's scattered formation from behind. "Contact," Vorn's voice cracked. "Secondary contact bearing." "I see it," Thal said. He was already moving, not toward Vorn's station but toward the tactical display where Sen stood frozen, her 6 eyes divided between the burned hull and the new blip. "Admiral, we are bracketed." Sen did not answer. Her mandibles clicked in a rhythm Thal had never heard, too fast, too irregular. The prosthetic hand touched her cloak, the silk of 12 conquered worlds, and for the first time Thal saw the gesture for what it was, a comfort. A child pulling a blanket. The new contact resolved on the main display before Vorn could filter it. No pulsar interference this time. No ghost. Just a ship, sleek and dark, emerging from the shadow of the outer moon where it had been waiting. waiting while the fleet burned fuel and raised shields and pointed weapons at the wrong thing. It was human. The Conquered Registry had files from the admission ceremony, small vessels, efficient, built for atmosphere and short hops. This was none of those things. Long and thin and utterly black, it moved like a thought rather than a machine. Designation, Sen asked, and her voice was steady. Thal gave her that. None in registry, Vorn said, but the transponder. She stopped. Her compound eyes widened, the dried honey color deepening. Her hands trembled. Vorn, Thal said, the transponder. It says, she swallowed. Thal had never seen a Vel-Shareth swallow. It says Iron Wake. The bridge went quiet, not the quiet of weight, the quiet of a held breath. Sen's mandibles clicked once. The fishing vessel. No one laughed. The sleek black ship was close now, close enough that the optical arrays caught it without filtering. Small compared to the Mandate, smaller than most cruisers. But it moved through the void with a certainty that made the Dominion ships look like toys. It did not raise shields. It did not charge weapons. It simply slid into position between the fleet and the burned hull as if completing a circuit. Thal felt the silence in the floor. The sphere had stopped humming, but the silence was louder now. It pressed against his eardrums. It pressed against his thoughts. Hail them, Sen said. The communications officer, a young Korvathi named Pren, his first campaign, looked up with his mandibles parted. Admiral. Hail them. Pren's hands moved. The hail went out, standard frequency, standard format. The Iron Wake did not reply. Instead, it opened. Not a hatch, not a door. A section of the hull simply separated, revealing a cavity that swallowed the starlight, darker than the void, and from within something emerged. Not a weapon, not a shuttle, a sphere. Bronze small, humming. It drifted from the Iron Wake into the void, moving without propulsion, humming a vibration that Thal felt in his teeth even through the Mandate's hull. It moved toward the fleet, not fast, not slow. At the speed of patience. Thal knew that sphere. He had held it once at the council station, pressed into his hands by Tren Sol's dry fingers. The old ambassador's dried honey eyes looking at him with something that might have been pity or warning. Commander, Vorn whispered, it's the same sphere. No, Thal said, it's the original. He did not know how he knew this, but he knew. The sphere in Sol's hands had been a copy, a seed, a message left to grow. This was the source, the first, the one that had been waiting since before the Conquered, before the classification, before the Dominion built its first ship. The sphere reached the center of the fleet formation. It stopped, and it began to change. The bronze surface rippled. Layers peeled back like a flower opening, each layer a different metal, a different age. Copper, tin, iron, steel. Alloys Thal had no names for, and at the center a core of something that held light without reflecting it. The light inside pulsed, once, twice, 3 times. And then the voice came. Not from the sphere, not from the Iron Wake, from everywhere. It spoke in galactic standard, but the accent was old, older than the Conquered, older than the Dominion. You have been counted, it said. You have been weighed, you have been found wanting. The words were not a threat. They were a statement, a fact, delivered with the same calm as the human captain's weather report. Sen's mandibles clicked, once. What is this, what is this? She was not asking the fleet. She was asking the universe, and the universe was not answering. The universe had already answered, 3 centuries ago, in a file marked cultural anomaly, non-urgent. Thal walked to the viewing blister. He did not run. He walked because his legs were the only part of him that still worked. The rest was frozen. The rest was comprehending. The burned hull was moving again, slowly, deliberately, not approaching the fleet, not approaching Earth. It was approaching the sphere. And the sphere was growing. Not expanding. Growing the way a tree grows, the way a civilization grows. Layer after layer, metal after metal, age after age. The copper of early tools, the iron of early wars, the steel of early ships, and the glass core pulsing with energy the Dominion had no word for. Vorn's voice came from behind him, small and broken. "Commander, the sensor readings, the mass, it's not possible." "What is the reading?" "The sphere, she stopped. "It's equal to the fleet, all of it, 1,247 ships. The sphere weighs the same, exactly the same." Thal pressed his palm against the blister's glass. The obsidian was cold. The void beyond was colder. And in the center of the fleet, a bronze sphere that had been waiting for 3 centuries was rewriting physics in real time. The burned hull reached the sphere. It did not collide. It merged. The hull's blackened metal touched the sphere's outer layer, and the metal flowed the way water flows, and the hull became part of the sphere, and the sphere became part of the hull, and the two were one. The Iron Wake watched, the fleet watched, and the voice came again. "We did not hide, we did not sleep, we did not forget, we built, we waited, we remembered, and now you are here." The merged shape turned. At the speed of inevitability, it faced the fleet. It faced the mandate. It faced Thal pressed against his blister's glass, his scar burning, his mandibles aching with a vibration that had no source. "Commander Thal," the voice said. Thal froze, it knew his name. "Your scar is human-made. Your war was human-watched. Your empire was human-measured. We have been in every room you thought was empty. We have been in every silence you thought was safe. We are not what you classified. We are what you failed to see." Sen's voice cut through, shrill and strange. "Fire. All ships fire." The order went out. Across 1,247 vessels, plasma lances discharged. Missile tubes opened. The void lit with the fury of the Dominion. The fire reached the merged shape, and it stopped. Not dissipated, not absorbed, stopped. The plasma froze in the void, hanging like frozen lightning. The missiles hung beside it, their drives cold, their warheads dark. The fury of the Dominion, suspended in a moment that would not end. The voice spoke one more time, quiet, calm, final. "That is not a vessel. That is a promise written in metal and time, and the promise is kept." Thal felt his knees buckle. He held the blister's frame, his claws digging into the obsidian, and he watched the frozen fire, and he watched the merged shape, and he watched the Iron Wake slide silently into position beside it. The horror was not the ship. The horror was not the sphere. The horror was not the frozen fire or the voice that knew his name. The horror was that humanity had never been weak. They had been patient. They had watched the Dominion for 3 centuries, measuring, weighing, counting. They had let the Dominion build its fleet. They had let the Dominion come. They had let the Dominion point its weapons and raise its shields. And then they had simply stopped it. Not with war, not with violence, with waiting, with preparation, with a patience so deep it looked like weakness from above. Thal turned from the blister. He looked at Sen, who stood with her mandibles parted and her prosthetic hand raised as if to ward off a blow that had already landed. He looked at Vorn, who had curled her hands into fists and was pressing them against her chest, the way her people did when they witnessed something too large for words. "Admiral," Thal said, "we need to talk." Sen did not answer. She was staring at the tactical display, where 1,247 ship icons hung in scattered formation, their weapons discharged, their fury suspended, their empire measured and found wanting. The Iron Wake did not move. The merged shape did not move. The frozen fire did not move. Thal walked to the communication station. He looked at Pren and he said, "Open a channel, not to the fleet. To the Iron Wake." Pren's hands shook, but they moved. The channel opened, the silence stretched, and then from the small dark ship a voice answered. Not the void voice, a human voice, calm, unhurried, the same voice that had spoken the 14 words. "Commander Thal," it said, We wondered when you would call. Thal felt the scar on his mandible ache, the ache of a wound that had healed around something that did not belong and was now being pulled to the surface. "Who are you?" Thal asked. The voice laughed, not cruel, not kind, just human. "We are the ones who filed the report. We are the ones who carried the sphere. We are the ones who waited. And now, Commander, we are the ones who answer." The channel held, the silence held. And Thal understood that the conversation he was about to have would change everything. Not just for the fleet, not just for the Dominion, for the galaxy, for the way the galaxy understood power and patience and the long game of civilizations. He spoke. The human voice waited. Thal did not speak immediately. He stood at the communication station, the channel open, the silence stretching between the mandate and the iron wake like a wire pulled tight. Around him, the bridge was frozen. Sen had not moved from the tactical display. Vorn had not moved from her sensor station. The frozen fire hung outside the viewing blister, a sculpture of Dominion fury suspended in a moment that would not end. He looked at his hands. He looked at the claws that had dug into the obsidian frame. He looked at the scar across his mandible, the human-made shell fragment that had been trying to tell him something for 3 years. "I am listening," he said. The voice answered, not from the void this time, from the iron wake. Close, personal, the voice of a man sitting in a chair, speaking into a microphone calm as weather. "You want to know what we are," the voice said. "You have been asking the wrong question. We are not a fleet. We are not a weapon. We are not a threat. We are a memory. We are what you forgot to look for." Thal felt the words settle, not like a stone, like water, like the slow filling of a vessel that had been empty for a very long time. "The file," Thal said, "cultural anomaly non-urgent. You filed it yourselves." "We filed it," the voice agreed. 3 centuries ago, the same year we joined your Concord, the same year we shook your hands and traded tin and honey. We filed it because we knew you would not read it. We knew you would file it under the same label you filed us under. Category 4, technologically adequate, militarily untested. The voice paused. Thal heard something in the background, a click, a rhythm, knuckles cracking. "We are not Category 4, Commander. We are Category 0. We are the baseline against which your categories were measured. We built the scale. We let you use it." Thal looked at Sen. She had turned from the tactical display. Her 6 eyes were on him, and in them he saw the settling he had felt in his own chest. The stone in mud, the truth that would not move again. "What do you want?" Thal asked. "Nothing," the voice said. "We already have it. We have your attention. We have your silence. We have your fleet hanging in the void above our world, weapons hot, shields raised, waiting for permission to fire. And we have decided not to give it." The words were simple. The words were devastating. Thal felt them land in the same place the shell fragment had landed 3 years ago on the realloy border, in the soft tissue behind the mandible, in the place where pride lived before it was torn out. "You could destroy us," Thal said. "It was not a question." "We could," the voice agreed. "We could have destroyed you 3 centuries ago. We could have destroyed you on the realloy border. We could have destroyed you when your fleet dropped from warp in the outer system and lit the void like a new star. We did not. Do you know why?" Thal knew. He had known since the sphere fell silent, since the words "we are still here" carved themselves into his mind. But he said nothing. He let the voice speak the answer he had already found. "Because destruction is not the point. The point is the waiting. The point is the file that sits in your archives, marked non-urgent, while the urgent things burn themselves out around it. The point is the sphere that hums for 3 centuries in a council chamber where no one listens. The point is the species that looks weak because it chooses not to show its strength." The voice paused again. The knuckles cracked once more. Thal thought of his own hands, his own habit, the ritual before every tactical assessment. He had not cracked his knuckles since the frozen fire. He had not needed to. The assessment was over. Your empire is built on conquest, the voice said. Ours is built on patience. Conquest is loud, patience is silent, and silence, commander, is the loudest word. The channel closed. Not with a click, not with static, just silence. The silence of a conversation that had reached its end. The silence of a species that had said everything it needed to say. Thal stood at the communication station. He stood for a long time. He stood while the bridge breathed around him, while Sen's mandibles clicked in rhythms that had no meaning, while Vorn's compound eyes tracked the frozen fire and the merged shape and the iron wake that had spoken and gone quiet. Then he turned. He walked to the center of the bridge. He walked past Sen, who did not see him. He walked past Vorn, who did not look up. He walked to the viewing blister, and he pressed his palm against the glass, and he looked at the frozen fire. It was beautiful. He had not expected that. The plasma lances, suspended in the void, their energy locked in shapes that looked like frozen lightning. The missiles, hanging beside them, dark and patient. The fury of the Dominion, caught in a moment of perfect stillness, as if the universe had decided to take a photograph of war before it started. Behind the frozen fire, the merged shape waited. The burned hull and the bronze sphere, grown together, facing the fleet with the patience of something that had already won. The iron wake sat beside it, small and dark and certain. And beyond them, Earth turned, pale and blue and utterly indifferent. Thal turned from the blister. He looked at Sen one last time. Admiral, the annexation is withdrawn. Sen's mandibles clicked. Once, the sound was small, the sound was broken. Commander, you do not have the authority. I do not need it. Thal gestured toward the viewing blister, toward the frozen fire. Toward the shape that had measured them and found them wanting. The authority is out there. It has been out there for 3 centuries. We just did not look. Sen did not answer. She turned back to the tactical display. Her prosthetic hand touched the screen, tracing the 1,247 ship icons that hung in scattered formation. Her 12-world cloak rippled in the recycled air. And Thal saw, for the first time, the stains on her collar. The respiratory paste stains from 4 centuries of bridge duty. The marks of a woman who had never lost, and had therefore never learned what winning cost. He turned from her. He walked to the bridge exit. He did not look back. The corridor was dark. The obsidian walls hummed with the silence of the sphere. 3 corridors away, Thal knew, Ambassador Trensol's quarters sat empty. The old Vel-Shareth had been reassigned to a border station 6 months ago, too old to travel, too inconvenient to keep. His bronze sphere had been left behind, filed under cultural anomaly, non-urgent. Thal reached the quarters. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The room was small, a sleeping mat, a writing desk, a single viewport showing the void, and on the desk the sphere. It was silent, not quiet, silent, the kind of silence that had waited, the kind of silence that had been waiting for 3 centuries to arrive. Thal picked it up. It was warm in his hands, warm and heavy and still. The vibration that had hummed through the floor of the mandate for 3 centuries was gone. The promise had been kept. The waiting was over. He turned the sphere in his hands. The bronze surface was smooth, unmarked, unchanged. But it was different. He could feel it. The sphere had been a message. Now it was a memory. It had been a warning. Now it was a witness. It had been waiting. Now it was done. Thal set the sphere back on the desk. He did not file it. He did not label it. He left it facing the viewport, where the frozen fire hung in the void and the merged shape waited and the earth turned beneath. He walked back to the bridge. He walked slowly. He walked like a man who had been fighting for 3 years and had only just realized there had never been a war. When he reached the blister, the fleet was moving. Not fighting, moving. The 1,247 ships were withdrawing, their drives flaring, their formations reforming, their weapons cooling. The frozen fire remained behind, a monument to a fury that had been stopped before it started. The Dominion was leaving, not in defeat, in comprehension. Thal stood at the blister. He watched the fleet shrink into the distance. He watched the merged shape grow smaller against the stars. He watched the iron wake slide silently into the shadow of the outer moon, where it had been waiting, where it would wait again. And he watched the Earth turn, pale blue, silent. The sphere sat on the old ambassador's desk, warm and still, facing the void where the frozen fire hung. The word had been spoken. The silence had answered. And the file that had predicted it all sat in the archives, marked non-urgent, waiting for the next species that would not think to read it.